welcome to this tactical analysis of the Arsenal versus Manchester City game at the top of the Premier League. In this video, we're going to have a look at Arsenal's deep build-up, their flexibility in midfield, and their 4-2-3-1 press. And for Manchester City, we're going to have a look at their 3-2-5 midfield shape and their 3-2-3-2 press, which changed in the second half to more of a 4-1-3-2 press. And with that, let's get into it. So starting in the first minute, actually, with Manchester City building up deep in a 3-2-5 shape, with Bernardo Silva playing a hybrid role as both left back but then also left CDM, this being against a 4-2-3-1 press from Arsenal, which was somewhat flexible in that Xhaka could also push up into this midfield line to make it more of a 4-1-4-1, depending on whether he's looking to mark a player tightly or not. Both teams looking, when they're pressing, to try and push the opposing team towards one side and then cut the pitch in half. And so we see that here, Xhaka pressing towards Ake. Then, as we mentioned, Xhaka here is pushing higher up, looking to try and put some pressure on Rodri, and Arsenal have cut the pitch in half with all their pressure on this right hand side. Manchester City throughout the game were actually quite happy to play those early balls for Haaland to contest, whether it was in behind or whether it was aerial duels. This eventually leads to Tomiyasu passing it back to Ramsdale. Defenders or teams retreating to their goalkeeper was present throughout this game, both happy to use the goalkeeper as the extra man and force the opposition's press to try and cover more space. It's weird how much deja vu you get from watching Tomiyasu do this pass here. And so after retreating to Ramsdale, Arsenal set up in their 2-3 or 3-2 deep build-up shape versus Manchester City's 3-2-3-2 or 4-1-3-2 shape. You have Haaland and De Bruyne as their centre forwards, supported by the three midfielders, and then behind them you've got Rodri and Silva on this bottom left-hand side. And for Arsenal, I mentioned it's a 2-3 or a 3-2 because they can vary it with having Gabriel and Saliba as the left centre-back and left-back, or as they did on this occasion, they keep Zinchenko in his traditional left-back position with just Jorginho central. And alternating these patterns keeps the Manchester City press guessing. Note here also Xhaka dropping, which creates space here for the likes of Nketiah or Martinelli to be able to drop and help Arsenal's defensive unit build up. Note Bernardo Silva, the quasi left-back, in his left CDM position, as well as also Walker tucking inside and being aggressive, winning this sliding tackle and forcing Arsenal into a hard reset. Having narrowed towards the touchline on this near side, Ramsdale will play early on this right hand side, allowing Tomiyasu to be able to get quite high up. Eventually we end up in that 2-3 shape for Arsenal versus the 4-3-3 with a very narrow forward line, with intention of the wide midfielders for Manchester City to stay narrow and put pressure specifically on Zinchenko and Jorginho. With this much congestion in the central spaces, Arsenal were forced into playing it in those wide channels, opting to focus on building up through Saka and Odegaard on its right hand side, although this was made very difficult by the attention that Bernardo Silva and Ake paid to Xhaka and just how aggressive they were in tackling him before he was able to build any sort of head of steam or combo with Nketiah or Odegaard. And so you see how I mentioned that the wide midfielders for Manchester City stayed narrow to pressure the centre defensive midfielders of Arsenal, prioritising them, those wide spaces instead being made the responsibility of the wide centre midfielders. And so Mahrez looking to try and pressure Gabriel, with De Bruyne, the right-sided wide centre midfielder, looking to pressure out into Xhaka here, who's dropped into that left-back position. Note also here Zinchenko, who's on paper the left back, is now here as right CDM. This sort of swapping was done throughout the game by Jorginho and Zinchenko to try and disrupt the Manchester City press. And as with the example a little bit earlier, you can see here how Manchester City have narrowed the press again. They've cut the pitch in half. Despite the pressure, the Arsenal left-hand side of their attack looked to combine here, but Manchester City are able to regain possession. Then Arsenal regained possession and they looked to force a transition and counter-attack. Now we can see Manchester City building up deep versus Arsenal's 4-2-3-1 shape, with the wide midfielders for Arsenal having this kind of hybrid role. They're expected to both press towards their nearest centre-back, but if the ball is played, for example, towards Manchester City's right-hand side, then Martinelli will go, but Saka will tuck inside, allowing Nketiah to be able to push up and leaving only Ake and the goalkeeper really as the options. But again, Saka will be closer to them too. And so we see that here progressing with Martinelli pushing up, looking to pressure Walker, whilst Nketiah is looking to pressure Diaz. So they're trying to box Manchester City into that right-hand side of the pitch. Despite Walker absolutely firing this into Mahrez, who's dropped because he was tracked so tightly by Gabriel here, the play breaks down. Slight slight adjustment here to Manchester City's build-up, where before we saw a 3-2 with Bernardo in midfield with Rodri. Instead here we've got a 4-1 with Rodri as the centre defensive midfielder and then Bernardo Silva dropping into the back line. These two both did this role. And so with Walker able to escape here on the right hand side and then release De Bruyne, Manchester City are able to find space for De Bruyne and Gundogan to exploit. Unfortunately for Manchester City, Jorginho, with his great positioning and reading, anticipation of this play, is able to intercept and stop Manchester City's counter-attack dead and start Arsenal's with a smart early through ball for Nketiah as Manchester City were looking to get into their attacking positions. Unfortunately, Nketiah isn't able or was unaware of Martinelli's positioning, so he somewhat rushes this shot and ends up having it blocked by Diaz. Okay, so I think this is a really great angle of Manchester City's adjusted press, because you've got your back three now. Bernardo Silva is no longer playing in his left back position or left CDM position. Instead, you have De Bruyne and Haaland being at the top, supported by Bernardo Silva, Gundogan and Foden or Grealish. Again, keeping Manchester City's press honest. Ramsdale decides to play it long into Saka and Nketiah on this right hand side, but Ake is staying touch tight. This leads to Manchester City throw-ins and eventually into a throw-in back to Diaz where he's clattered by Nketiah. Eventually, Arsenal regain possession and we get to see them try and build up through this adjusted press, where I think that Arsenal still had a lot to gain. We see that through them playing through the Manchester City press and creating decent chances. I also think there's clumsiness in this left-hand side in the combination play. So unlike how we showed the 3-2-3-2 earlier, instead we have more of a 4-2-3-1 because Xhaka had started higher up the pitch, and now we've got De Bruyne tracking Xhaka dropping with Haaland looking to try and help cut the pitch. Another quick point is also having Bernardo push to this right-hand side, I think relieves the pressure on him because he doesn't have to tackle in this position. Okay, so here with Jorginho and Xhaka unable to turn and face towards Manchester City's goal, they're forced into playing it back. And with Zinchenko in a left-back position, rather than taking up a cleverer position than Xhaka's here, where he's an impossible option, Zinchenko is out here providing less utility. Eventually, Arsenal are able to work the ball out into Zinchenko in quite a clumsy way, in my opinion. I mean, Man City now able to rush over and really narrow the space, leading to an Arsenal throw-in. Arsenal send it for Nketiah and Saka to contest, as Walker was drawn deeper into the Arsenal half by Martinelli's movement. Saka stays strong here against Akanji and has supporting runners. And whilst this was from a throw-in initially rather than open play, I think this is a good example of Arsenal beating the Manchester City press. Fortunately, even after this really nice move and Tomiyasu's absolutely gorgeous ball, Nketiah wasn't able to connect with the cross and he possibly could have been offside. Okay, so one last quick scenario. We've got the 2-3 again, so you've got your back line supported by Zinchenko, Jorginho and Tomiyasu. It's a really nice combination play here. I'm gonna have to highlight the fact that Ake didn't have to defend against Saka for the whole game, so at this point he has no yellow cards and he's able to be aggressive for the last 30 minutes or so. I think that's quite clever. Ultimately, Rodri and Ake are able to combine against Saka and regain possession, but Bernardo Silva decides to play the ball early into Haaland to try and contest or maybe run in behind for a counter-attack. But unfortunately for Manchester City, Saliba and Gabriel are really good at regaining possession through their positioning or counter-pressing. So we see the Arsenal 3-2 setup again with Zinchenko having inverted, but unlike in the first half where it was that 4-3-3, we now have a 4-4-2 press from Manchester City. Manchester City are able to force Arsenal into retreating against the 4-1-4-1 or 4-4-2 press. Ramsdale plays a nice pass into Odegaard, who's dropping. Again, note how I mentioned that Zinchenko and Jorginho could swap positions. With Odegaard having dropped and calmed things down, Arsenal are able to force Manchester City into retreating. Again, I have to point out clever movement by Zinchenko. Him moving in this direction in combination with Odegaard is what is forcing this retreat out of the Manchester City team, as they simply cannot leave this space exposed. Eventually, after having helped relieve pressure, Odegaard is able to get into this central position, and a smart pass from Jorginho through the lines, through the Manchester City press, which is trying to reset, allows Odegaard and the Arsenal attack to force a transition, eventually leading to the ball played to the left-hand side. But Xhaka, as I mentioned earlier, just the Arsenal team in this final third, unable to connect with their final through ball or cross. And with that, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed the content, please give it a thumbs up, consider sharing it on social media and subscribing.